The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost is probably the most commonly misinterpreted poem written by an American in the 20th century. Quite simply, a lot of times people think that this is a greeting card poem. Oh, like I took the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Meaning that this poem is trying to say some sort of nonconformist credo or something like that, where the choices you make in life are super important, and all of that, and that if you branch out, if you take the road less traveled, then that's the thing that's going to make a difference in your life. That makes for a relatively good story, but it's not really what the poem is actually saying or what it's actually about. If you read it closely, you notice that it says, "Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, and both that morning equally lay, and leaves no step had trodden black." In a lot of ways, him going and saying that one of the roads is less traveled is actually kind of ridiculous, because previously he'd said that the roads were pretty much the same. So that opens up the idea that potentially in this last stanza, our narrator is actually kind of maybe even being a little bit sarcastic about this whole entire thing. I shall be telling this with a sigh somewhere ages and ages hence, where he's trying to uplift the story of his past and act as if the decisions he made really made a difference, when in some ways the decisions he made were really kind of arbitrary and didn't really make that much of a difference at all. And he might actually in the end be kind of bragging about something that was really kind of accidental. So there's all of that, which does make this poem complicated. There is also that interesting question of how it begins. "Two roads diverged in the yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler." Another thing that this poem is about is just the idea that we have to make choices in life. We have to choose one decision or another decision. And, once we make that one decision, we can't go back and just take the other road. If you decide to get married, then that's the decision you made, versus if you had decided not to get married. And that's just one particular example. There are millions of them out there. You could have gotten up this morning or not gotten up this morning, but the bottom line is that once you pick a road, you're kind of stuck with that road. And the thing that Frost is saying here at the end, where it says, "I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference," is that in some ways you can go back and you can justify that decision that you made as if it were something grandiose, when really it might have just been pretty random. So, sorry to burst your bubble about that poem just being about nonconformity, but there is also that other stuff going on as well. The next poem on the docket is The Colonel by Carolyn Forche. This is another example of a prose poem, one of those genre-bending situations. This poem, in many ways, is quite straightforward. It really is just kind of like a story. Person is at a dictator's house. The dictator has a conversation with them, but then if you read it closely, it's very beautiful the way it's written. Everything in it does have a lot of purpose to it. There's nothing that's just sort of glossed over, or it doesn't have a lot to it. The subtle pistol on the cushion beside him. Broken bottles were embedded in the walls around the house to scoop the kneecaps from a man's leg or cut his hands to lace. There's a lot of brutality to this. And of course, that brutality really comes into focus towards the end of the poem, when this colonel goes ahead and throws the ears on the table. And that leads to the whole entire complicated issue of the last lines where it says, "Something for your poetry, no?" he said. Some of the ears on the floor caught the scrap of his voice. Some of the ears on the floor were pressed to the ground. There's a lot of different interpretations for these last few sentences. And that last one, some of the ears on the floor were pressed to the ground, is particularly complicated to try to figure out exactly what Forche is trying to accomplish. But as we know, in some ways, we can come up with our own interpretation. We can sort of decide what we would like that to mean. As long as we can build a case for it, then we're validated. So in some ways, you say, when would a person put their ear to the ground? Well, you can put your ear to the ground to try to hear what's coming in the future. And that is sort of one of the preferred possible interpretations here, that you put your ear to the ground, try to hear what's coming. And for these particular ears in this poem, what's coming, hopefully, is something a little bit better than what's already passed. And that brings us to another poem that is somewhat related to that in theme. Sherman Alexie's On the Amtrak from Boston to New York City. This might be the angriest poem that we're going to be covering, because it does have a little bit of ferocity to it. This is more sort of a social commentary in a way that many of our other readings haven't been. So it's talking about things very directly. A couple things to point out. Walden Pond was the pond that Henry David Thoreau, the great American transcendentalist, he stayed by for 2 years when he wrote his famous book. And Don Henley, he was one of the members of the rock band the Eagles, and he had a lot to do with trying to save Walden Pond. But basically, Alexie, who is a Native American, one of the things that he's getting across here is that we look back at things like Walden Pond as being, a great American tradition, when really that was, only 160 some years ago. And similarly, we look at Don Henley and rock and roll as being something sublimely and supremely American as well, when in fact, rock and roll is this new thing, So it's, both of these examples are really pointing out the fact that America's history really is kind of a brief thing, and that from a Native American perspective, such as the person who is on this Amtrak being talked to by this woman who's pointing these things out to him, it seems kind of absurd to talk about American history when the history of Native Americans goes back so much further. And that gets to this complicated situation at the end here. I respect elders of every color. All I really did was eat my tasteless sandwich, drink my Diet Pepsi, and nod my head whenever the woman pointed out another little piece of her country's history, while I, as all Indians have done since this war began, made plans for what I would do and say the next time somebody from the enemy thought I was one of their own. So this is sort of a really, really haunting and direct and scathing sort of critique against sort of white primacy in America, and the idea that a white person, for instance, would have any understanding of the actual reality of America or of its history. So this poem, is a little bit more direct. We're not necessarily negotiating the meanings of particular words or the interpretation of particular phrases. It's more sort of a big picture commentary, and it shows how poetry has the ability to be political.